Hey everyone, and welcome to the webinar series on working with families and caregivers of transgender and gender diverse youth on behalf of the organization Stand with Trans. I'm Amy Verway, and I'm happy to be able to be here and share a lot of my experiences and knowledge with you as providers who are working with these families in support of their gender diverse kids. A little bit more about me. I identify as queer and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a master's level limited license psychologist in Michigan and have been fully licensed for about 10 years now. I'm the co-owner of River City Psychological Services, an affirming private practice located in West Michigan. And we have approximately 30-ish or so other therapists also working with us. I'm a registered play therapist, and I have a full caseload that is comprised of children, adolescents, teens, and adults, and most of them are members of the LGBTQ community. I am a WPATH, World Professional Association for Transgender Health, certified transgender health provider and mentor. I serve on the advisory board for the organization Stand with Trans. I am a member of multiple national coalitions who serve to advocate for the trans community, especially for youth and their family members. I'm also a member of a National Speakers Bureau, and I've been specifically trained to advocate in different types of capacities for trans youth as well. I recently have testified at the Michigan House of Representatives Committee for various House bills and have had the honor to be able to be present for the recent United States Supreme Court case in Washington, D.C. That also involved trans youth. I also sit on the board of directors for Grand Haven Pride. I wanted to speak a little bit towards my personal lens, just to make sure that I'm clear from where I'm coming from as a provider. I definitely want to acknowledge that my lens on this topic comes from a white queer perspective in West Michigan and is probably impacted by my own life experiences. I started off working my career in an agency type setting and received tons of clients from many different backgrounds. I had a trans client walk through my door one day and I was thrilled to be able to help, but very quickly realized that I had zero support throughout that agency or resources or really anything. And so I began to create my own, and I vowed that that would never happen again in my office. And I've since dedicated my career to working with the 2S LGBTQ population very proudly. I continue to learn new information while I have the privilege to work with my clients and their families and my colleagues and the community itself. There's always going to be updated information to be able to share, and we're always learning. So many people and providers come in and out of the lives of the people that we work with on a daily basis. We just can't control all of those narratives, but we can support the people who walk through our doors the best we can. I might only get to work with a client maybe once per week, probably less, and even more so less than the caregivers and families that are with them. So it's really important to be able to help foster growth and understanding as best as we can to create a supportive environment in our offices. I wanted to acknowledge the land first and foremost, and I wanted to recognize that the lands that I'm recording this webinar series on were stewarded by Indigenous people long before colonialization, and that their connection to this land continues to this day. And I honor their enduring presence, culture, and contribution. Some disclaimers and disclosures, some housekeeping before we start. The opinions expressed in this presentation are mine, and they have been reviewed by the organization Stand with Trans. I have attested that there are no financial or other conflicts of interest related to this presentation, and that I did receive compensation for the creation of this presentation from Stand with Trans. Legal, ethical, and cultural standards can change very quickly, and it is ultimately the responsibility of each individual provider to remain as current as appropriate. A little bit more housekeeping and confidentiality. The slides, resources, and references are available to access. And this presentation is obviously pre-recorded and it's going to be made available at the Stand with Trans Lifeline Library. Any vignettes or case examples provided within this presentation are based on the combination of real cases with any and all identifiable details altered or left out to maintain confidentiality. By viewing this, you agree to maintain this confidentiality and continue to avoid any identifiable information. Some limitations for this series. All of this was really what was available to me research-wise when I created this, along as what I was able to select within the time frame of creation. All situations, experiences, and identities are so vast and unique, and therefore are not all represented within this presentation. This is really just scratching the surface regarding this topic and can be expanded upon in so many different areas for even more insight. This is by no means an exhaustive list of information. Potential reactions, facts, cultural representation. There's definitely more research and deepening of knowledge that's always necessary to build up a baseline. The potential risks. This presentation definitely discusses some pretty uncomfortable topics related to societal stressors, systemic issues, transphobia, aspects of trauma. So I want to make very clear to take care of yourself. And remember to pause the video to self-regulate whenever necessary if anything is coming up for you. I wanted to include this picture that I actually took this picture, and it was from a sunset in Michigan over Lake Huron. And after I took this picture, I was like, oh, wow, that definitely looks like a trans flag. So I was excited to be able to have this just natural, no filtered image. Okay, so some learning objectives that we're going to make sure that we cover throughout this series. We're going to identify at least 3 ways in which experiences of understanding and emotions may impact and complicate a caregiver's ability to best support their trans child. We're going to discuss some ways in which caregivers can effectively support the emotional regulation of their kiddo. Identify the importance of a network of affirming providers to work together with other caregivers to make thoughtful decisions about social and medical transition options. And we're going to identify healthy interpersonal communication skills for caregivers and their families. Just a course outline. We're going to split this up into 3 different parts so that it's a little bit easier to digest. We're going to do some key terms, challenges, importance of support, and then we're going to explore some concerns, emotions, and barriers. Then we're going to hop back into working effectively with caregivers and their family members, go over some gender identity exploration and collaboration with other providers. Then we're going to address legal questions and unknowns, and we're going to work on some self-care for providers as well. And then do a brief overview of some of the resources that I've compiled for you all for caregivers, families, and providers. This whole presentation is going to be trying to capture the potential barriers across the board with families and how to support them in general. There's going to be a lot of different options and topics that we'll cover. The hope that when we have clients come through our office doors is that their caregivers are going to have a baseline narrative of affirmation for the child's identity. So hopefully a lot of the time that understanding may come easier for them than others. But I think that it's really important to be able to have a lot of different tools and skills and understanding to effectively work with many different family dynamics, especially ones that may have disagreements or concerns or questions, and then be able to give that support and help to clarify any even like volatile messages that our trans youth clients might be receiving and be able to help support as best as we can. All right, so key challenges, or key terms, challenges, and importance of support. So key terms, I mean, there's a lot of different terms, and it's good to recognize that a lot of different caregivers and families may come to us and be like, I don't know what this means, so it's important to help them explore and help to educate them about different dynamics and different terminology. And a big thing to note too is to make sure that we as providers are using the definitions that our clients are using, because some terms might look different for different clients. So I'll make sure to ask, like, even though I might know the definition, the specific definition of something, I might ask my client, I will ask my client, like, what does that mean to you? Like, explain that to me more about like what that means to you. And I also want to note that this whole presentation, I've utilized an assumption that all of us have a good baseline knowledge of the nuances of working with trans and gender diverse youth and terminology and a good understanding of the different mental health impacts throughout. Um, and it's kind of like the baseline that I'm using to be able. So I won't go so deeply into those types of nuances and specifically go more so with working effectively with families and some of those nuances that might be happening. So I just want to make a note of that. And I'll definitely have a lot more information at the end and resources for seeking out additional information and understanding. So some of the terms, and these specific definitions I received from an awesome glossary from the Grand Rapids Pride Center website. And it's a bunch of different lingo on there and different types of terminology. And St. Louis Trans also has an amazing library of resources too to be able to utilize. These specific terms I added in here are ones that I notice a lot of family members will ask for clarification about. So, assigned sex. Assigned sex at birth is what the doctor assigns the person based upon their external anatomy when they were born, which is, it can be different than a person's gender identity. So that's a big key thing that I like to explain to caregivers. Gender identity is a personal experience of gender. Gender expression can also be very different from gender identity. This also is probably one of a big confusing points that I see with family members. They'll might say different things like, well, this person wears a dress, so I would assume this one gender, but gender expression is just very different, can be very different than gender identity. It is how one expresses themselves in terms of how they may dress or presentation of self. So for example, someone can identify as female and present very masculine. Sexual orientation. This is also not the same as gender identity, which can be confused sometimes for caregivers and families. That sexual orientation is one's attraction or non-attraction to other people. Gender dysphoria. This is when a person experiences discomfort or distress because there is a mismatch between their sex assigned at birth and their gender identity. This experience greatly differs from person to person, and not every trans person experiences dysphoria. And a lot of trans folks will experience euphoria when aligning with a certain identity. And dysphoria for trans folks can be incredibly painful and can manifest in so many different ways. And it's really important to help caregivers and family members to understand the depth of that pain. And when we can help family members understand that, then we can unlock different doors of empathy so that they can be able to hear their child's journey a little bit better. Gender euphoria is a significantly positive feeling that may be experienced when one's gender is recognized and respected, or they are able to express themselves and their true gender identity. Now, it's being recognized for who you are, and it just can feel awesome, to be able to have that. I also included one of my favorite tools that I use sometimes with kiddos and sometimes with family members as well. This is the Gender Galaxy from Action Canada for Sexual Health and Rights. I like this one because it feels more fluid and it outlines more types of identities. The separation into different galaxies as well, with the knowledge that everything impacts the same universe, to me, it just feels very powerful. All right, so let's review some of the challenges of trans youth. I think it's important to have a good baseline knowledge of this. So as we know, our trans youth, they face all kinds of different challenges. The majority of these are felt by most people in various marginalized communities, really, but the focus today is on trans youth. And it's important to remember that these experiences can be, again, vastly different for a number of reasons. There are varying degrees of harm between every different type of dynamic. This is just an overview of different types of potentials that we can try to mitigate as providers and support systems as best as we can. So we have discrimination and stigma, like this can be included within the educational system, public spaces, healthcare settings, really literally anywhere that the trans youth might be present. This can lead to feelings of isolation, rejection, emotional dysregulation, so many deep mental health impacts. Bullying and harassment. Bullying, both verbal, physical, emotional. This can be in school, virtually, in various programs, online, in person. You know, perceived, not perceived. Like this can be anywhere, and with different environments and hostile environments and not hostile environments, this can be something very pervasive for trans youth. It can increase anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts. Again, so many different types of dysregulation across the board. Family rejection. A lack of family support can exacerbate the mental health struggles of trans youth. So rejection by parents or caregivers, extended family members, friends who are very close can often lead to higher rates of homelessness, depression, self-harm, substance use. There's a theme here that so many of these things deeply impact our trans youth and are still pervasive and can lead to some scary outcomes. More challenges, so limited access to affirming healthcare. This is the big one too. Like we are getting more and more providers who are able to advocate and learn more about the community and become more specialized within care. But they're still hard to access. A lot of them, I know myself included, have really long wait lists and struggle to be able to accommodate all of the needs of all the people that we have in the community. So access to gender affirming medical care, even just like puberty delaying hormones, hormone therapy, they might be limited not only to those types of potential geographic or affirmation barriers too, but financial barriers because of potential insurance denials, legal barriers that we'll chat about later on in the webinar series. So there's a lot of different types of barriers to just access this medical care. Legal and policy barriers, following up with that. Some regions have different restrictive laws that make it difficult for trans youth to access gender affirming care, difficult to update legal documents or receive protections from discrimination. So when we don't have these types of legal protections in place, there's an entire other layer of fear that is present. Even if they're not present in the youth's own state, they still exist and they're still scary, and our youth still sees them. So helping with this support is even more important. Mental health concerns. So obviously we talked a lot about mental health concerns within each of these different challenges. So overall, there's many different mental health concerns that put trans youth at risk. This is also due to this constant potential social, familial, legal challenges. Trans youth are at a higher risk for mental health issues, anxiety, depression, substance use, suicide ideation. All of that can be there for trans youth. And I think it's really important to note that with suicide ideation, trans youth are not inherently prone to suicide risk because of their gender identity or sexual orientation, but instead they're at a higher risk because of how they may be mistreated, rejected, and stigmatized. I want that to be very clear because we see a lot about the correlation of trans and gender diverse youth with suicide ideation or attempts. That is not because of their gender identity or sexual orientation, but inherently they're at a higher risk because of how they are mistreated, rejected, stigmatized, and view other people making comments about their identity in the world. So this rejection, these feelings of isolation and significant increased risk of mental health concerns, that is all there. I think in 2023, Trevor Project found that 41% of LGBTQ youth are seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. And these are young people who are transgender, non-binary, and are people of color reported even higher rates than their peers. Fewer than 40% of LGBTQ young people found their home to be LGBTQ affirming. These are scary statistics. They're very scary statistics. And we can help take steps to mitigate them, to have supported people within our trans youth lives. one of the largest protective factors against all of these things is acceptance, or at least working to learn and understand. Putting forth an effort for our trans youth is the most important thing. So acceptance is the support is crucial for the well-being of a trans child and enhancing resiliency. And this promotes the child's mental, emotional, physical health. And there's significant decrease in risk for depression, anxiety, suicide ideation, and other negative outcomes, including self-harm and substance use. Trans and non-binary young people reported all the people they live with respect their pronouns reported lower rates of attempting suicide just respecting their pronouns. 40% lower odds of attempting suicide in 2023 compared to young people who were out to caregivers and did not feel accepted. Again, these numbers are huge. We know them. We know they exist. Just wanted to touch on them one more time to really start off the importance of working with these families to be able to understand them and best help them in the way that we can do the best care for our trans clients. So let's explore those concerns, emotions, and barriers. We know, again, the importance of support for our trans youth in any capacity. But now we have to try to explore different concerns, emotions, and barriers that caregivers and family members might have to that support that might be impacting their struggles and their ability to hear and affirm their kiddo. So first, we're probably going to see a wide range of emotional reactions of caregivers, and for so many different reasons. It's really important to meet caregivers and family members where they are within this process and make space for any emotions that might be present. Caregivers and family members, we want to give them an opportunity to genuinely express their emotions, and that can really help to build rapport with us as providers and increase this trust together so that we can keep building upon things and move forward with support for their trans kids. It's really important to remember that all of these emotions are not linear. Like I kind of have them, they're all very different next to each other. And they might present themselves at any time during processing or not at all. All experiences are unique. You're going to hear me say that a lot throughout this presentation, and that they're based on so many different factors. So going through a couple of them, we have confusion and surprise, sometimes even shock. This might come about when family members might struggle with understanding an identity or saying like, oh, I didn't have any signs about that. People just don't inherently love being surprised. So this could be something that might feel like that for family members. Grief. Some family members might express an initial experience over a perceived loss of their child's expected future potentially, or even saying, more difficult things to hear, like I feel like my child died, which we'll touch upon later as well. And these comments are really important to be able to hear and sit with the parent and be able to process where that feeling comes from and how that feels for them, so that we can hear them and then help them to reframe and reflect on those things so that those feelings don't extend towards pain feeling from their child. Those things are absolutely okay to process within a therapeutic setting with a provider. And those are really important to be able to contain within that office and help the parent, the caregiver, or the family member to be able to understand them and then recognize their ability to reframe them, that they actually gained experiences with their child instead of lost. And at the same time, the emotion the family member is feeling is completely valid. Fear, societal rejection, bullying, difficulty in the future, medical care, safety, unknowns, all of those things could potentially pop up for family members. They might have personal fears of what might happen to their kiddo. They might have personal fears of what might happen in the family. They may have different, again, tough fears and emotions to hear as a provider that we would explore personally with the caregiver, right? Again, to try to help mitigate any of the pain that might accidentally be put onto the youth. Some guilt. Sometimes family members might take on blame for different experiences or also feel guilty at some point along the journey for struggling to be affirming or have more outward acceptance, or if some of their emotions, like the aspects of grief or fear, if they accidentally impacted the youth in a harmful way. Family members can have different aspects of guilt that is also really important to process and then keep building upon to grow with and keep moving forward. Denial, rejections of identity, and obviously we've talked about how much that this can impact trans youth. And then acceptance. And acceptance, again, and this could also be an ebb and a flow. We might have some acceptance right out of the gate, and then we might move into like, oh no, fear and different aspects of grief or confusion, and we can bounce back and forth because, again, this is not linear. And that movement towards pockets of acceptance speak volumes for our youth. They really do. It's a greater understanding and knowledge of identity and embracing and affirming. And it's really important to celebrate those little wins, those little successes, to be able to build upon and validate the other emotions to be able to understand them. Because understanding these emotions help us to understand where the caregiver is coming from to best know what type of language and communication we can use as providers to be able to reach them and to be able to create a safe environment where they feel like they can explore those tough questions. Experiences of compersion. So this is experiences of joy and celebration of another person's happiness. So genuine joy at seeing this other person genuinely happy. So we can apply that here as well to a caregiver seeing their child experience joy or gender euphoria surrounding their identity, and then that caregiver experiencing like genuine joy by seeing that. And of course, joy and pride. So an increased sense of pride for the child's sense of self, bravery, and identity development. So with understanding a lot of those different emotions, and there's definitely more, that's not an exhaustive list, of course, by any means. We can think about how all of those things combine together to look even further underneath, right? So that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg, or a lot of those different emotions. Now, what's underneath a lot of those emotions? We got to remember that we're seeing clients and their caregivers and families from all walks of life and experiences, and it's just important to understand them the best we can. It's really like a science experiment every time, like quite literally. We're trying to figure out what has been added together over time to lead to different reactions that we're seeing within our offices. So we'll go into more of these in detail to gain some more insight. So we're gonna go through some conflicts with personal ideology, cultural and societal expectations and creations of norms, pressure from other areas, so maybe the caregiver's employment, socio-political environments, religious communities, etc. Different myths and misconceptions they might have about trans identities and transitioning, navigating differences of opinions within the family, generational trauma and experiences and prevalence. Different attachment styles of the caregiver definitely impact how they might interact with their kiddo, and self-awareness, interpersonal communication, growth, and again, these reactions are built upon all of these layers of experiences that the caregiver may or may not have. So, starting off with thinking through some of the role of societal and cultural norms. So, social media and news source impacts. These different factors before that are impacted too by geography, socioeconomic status, and various experiences family have as well. So social media. These are full of positive and negative aspects for our trans youth. Some youth find solace within social media and the connections with their friends, and they find like-minded people who may have similar experiences to themselves. A lot of youth can find clarity and peace with other experiences. And sometimes parents will feel their child's identity has been influenced by other people. I definitely want to express through my experiences and research, kids more so tend to gravitate towards groups they feel comfortable and relate to, not to change their entire gender identity to fit into the group. So they gravitate towards them because they relate, not because they want to change to fit into a group. Gender dysphoria is a much stronger feeling than that, and it persists over time through various friend groups. On the other hand, social media and news sources, which are near impossible not to see or hear, can be a nightmare for kids and caregivers alike due to the misinformation and painful ideologies that can be present. So there's unfortunately a lot of toxic negativity, gatekeeping, hateful comments just running rampant about trans folks and kids, which can be internalized by trans youth and their caregivers, even in the most supportive of homes. So they can definitely influence caregivers who are unsure or questioning or struggling different aspects of support. It's important to help their parents listen to the fears of these kiddos and create this loving and safe environment for the kids to be able to regulate their emotions and for us as providers to be able to help navigate all of these things that caregivers and families might see on social media. Different stereotypes surrounding gender roles and parenting styles. Understanding these roles within family dynamics can help with understanding gender-based anxieties. So we want to try to move away from a binary system and different considerations of the constructs of gender identity. So again, it's helpful to wonder aloud with parents as opposed to challenging any beliefs. So when we hear different ideals from parents about gender roles and parenting styles, we want to be able to listen and wonder aloud about various questions and where those ideologies are rooted, and be able to gently nudge and offer different types of education and wondering aloud about different perspectives of reframing. These stereotypes have huge impacts from society in general as well, which is important to remember, even if they're not specific beliefs within the home. Um, so I think that that's important to remember when we see families come in who don't maybe who present more understanding and affirming, but then have feelings of stuck or barriers to something. Could be related to just messages of things that they're hearing. Cultural influences, religious community influences. Parents may have a hard time reconciling any culture, religious, or community views and messaging that might conflict with their child's identity development. Again, as with the other ones we're building upon, it's helpful to just wonder aloud with parents as opposed to challenging any beliefs. We want to be really respectful within cultural context and grow as clinicians through any macro, majority, or privilege lens that we also might have from our own internal biases, and be able to, again, just listen. Listen with an empathetic and active ear to be able to hear where parents are coming from and be very respectful to different aspects of their culture, to be able to, or religious identities or community, to be able to connect in a certain way to continue to work towards growth and best interests of their kiddos. Education within different types of culture or religious identities can be really important to be able to reflect upon this and continue to grow as providers to increase our own cultural awareness and the uniqueness of the experiences of our clients. Within different socio-political environments, this can impact feelings of safety for a trans youth, even in supportive homes. Again, kind of similar to just some of those messages that our kids and caregivers are hearing. Because of all the media and the messages that they're pretty much receiving every day. We know that we're receiving these messages too. So just being thoughtful and aware of that is important as we navigate these different types of communication. Colonialization has lasting impacts on our trans youth from multiple different anti-LGBTQ policies throughout generations and generational ideology and difficulty separating from a binary way of thinking because of these deeply rooted concepts and ideals. This colonialization creates just a baseline lens of social stigma, fear of discrimination, micro and macro aggressions, and anti-trans rhetoric that is really difficult to combat because, again, it is there and it is all over the place. So remembering that that continuously exists for caregivers and their family members, and different family members have different um, lenses through that. So that's more impactful for different people because, again, of these different layers of reactions that go together to form the current response to their kiddo. So being able to pick that all apart is really important to be able, again, to foster this understanding and growth and to just try to get it and join with these caregivers and families just to be able to understand them and give them a place where they also know that we're trying to understand them to a certain capacity, um, where they feel that they will have room to grow. Lots of interconnectedness and intersectionality. This is understanding how a person's social, cultural, religious, political, socioeconomic identities, pretty much most of the things we just talked about, they just completely intersect with one another and they result in these unique experiences of discrimination and or privilege. So there's just a lot of moving parts that are impacting one another, and it's really important to be able to start to pull those apart to be able to understand them as best as we can. Um, and throughout different types of intersectionality, interconnectedness, there is just disproportionate discrimination against different marginalized communities within the queer community, especially trans people of color and especially with trans women. And it's really important to, again, know and just be aware of a lot of um, these different concepts and these different realities as we're working with our families to be able to have these different kinds of contexts with how we're having conversations and how we are hearing and understanding and reacting to what we're hearing, to be able to react to them in a more baseline way that is non-reactive on our own part, to be able to help them the best as we can. Social stigma, so obviously it's no secret that all of these things impact the experiences of our trans youth, with social stigma and discrimination throughout many different aspects. So caregivers may also feel isolated or judged by their community, friends, extended family, and this could potentially lead to more internal conflicts about how they support their child. So again, all of these things, as we're talking about all of them, like it feels heavy because it's all just like adding, right? If we have this analogy of this cup for family members, for caregivers, all these different things are adding different things, and all of a sudden we're overflowing, and family members are not having as positive of a reaction as they might want to have for their kids, but we get to understand what's in this cup and be able to help caregivers to also understand that and kind of like bring those down different notches so that there's more room for them to have positive interactions with their kids. Caregivers can also experience an intense fear for discrimination that their kids may face, which could lead them to try to overprotect their child by not allowing them to flourish, transition, explore, whatever. And that can accidentally cause more harm for the child, even though it's coming from a place of fear and straight up protection. They may support them fully, but that fear might accidentally look like harm for the kid. So it's really important to be able to sit down with caregivers through these emotions, hold them together with them, and work through the emotions with empathy, acknowledge where the protection is coming from, what we see that, how we see that protection, and how we know it's coming from a place of concern and love. And we can have ands here, right? So it's coming from a place of concern and love, and it's also potentially harming, right? I use the term like accidentally harming a lot or potential harm or things like that because I found throughout my work with parents and caregivers and family members that that helps to remove a little bit of that guilt, and it helps parents to be able, or caregivers to be able to hear me more and what the harm might be, right? Because if we're just like, oh, you're harming them, caregivers will shut down typically. But if we can give them some grace and try to say things like that could cause some accidental harm and help them to see what that might look like, we have a better chance of being able to join with them and have some true growth and understanding. Um, We also witness the micro and macro aggressions and the anti-trans rhetoric daily. So again, that has lasting impact that just builds over time. No matter the size, like 1,000 different paper cuts sometimes for different people, and that just builds and builds. So being able to alleviate that over time and continue to grow, continue to create this helpful supportive dynamic is really important. It's also really important to help parents and caregivers and family members to navigate external pressures. So again, caregivers might feel pressures from external family members, the community, all the things we just went through. So it's helpful to help them to recognize and address different influences and pressures while emphasizing the importance of the child's well-being above all these other external judgments. So that's very important to try to help caregivers to remember, because those influences can be very, very, very loud. And really remember that this is not to change anyone's beliefs or opinions, but to simply understand them more, to be able to more effectively work with them together to support their kiddo. Again, you're going to see it's a theme throughout here. It's important to evaluate and seek out accurate information, and to help families we are working with to do the same. Again, all of these factors that we just talked about are impacted even more greatly by misinformation and myths and misconceptions. So let's go over a couple of those that we might see within our offices. And it's good to have a baseline knowledge of being able to better understand these, where they're coming from, and then the true facts to be able to combat these and educate caregivers and family members who may come into our office wanting to ask these tough questions. And again, we want to make sure that we're creating the space where our caregivers can feel like they can ask these tough questions, or else we might lose them and they might not have a place to ask them, so they may end up accidentally harming their kiddo by asking them, or seeking out information from another source and just might not get accurate answers. So we want to make sure that we're creating this environment for them in the best way that we can. So, and I know there's a lot of content on these slides, so mainly have this here so that later you can take a look at it. Okay, so common myths and facts. Myth number 1, sex and gender are the same thing. No, the fact. Multiple factors are involved to determine assigned sex at birth, including chromosomes, prenatal hormone influence, pre-existing hormone levels, anatomical structures, brain structures. There are multiple different fascinating things that actually go into our gender. And it is not just anatomical structure that is involved with assigning sex at birth. Now, I believe this is in the resources. There's a lot of really cool research on this that shows this over and over and over again. And I have some of that within the references and the resource pages. Myth number 2, being trans is a fad influenced by peers to get attention. No. The fact is that what we understand and know is that trans youth gravitate more towards like-minded and similar individuals for support and understanding, not the other way around. This is similar in most contexts, not just gender identity. No. So again, gender dysphoria is a lot stronger than a fad or just wanting to change for a different group of people. Gender dysphoria is pervasive and continues on. Next myth, being trans is a mental illness. No. The fact there is that some trans people may experience feelings of gender dysphoria, which impacts our mental health, impacts the person's mental health, but that is not universal. Many trans people can experience gender euphoria as well over time. Being trans is not the mental illness. The mental illness can be caused by the stigma and discrimination is involved, as well as the incongruence between the person's assigned sex at birth and gender identity. So gender dysphoria. There are way more trans people now. That's another myth that I hear sometimes. No. The fact is, there have been trans folks and identities spanning so many generations, multiple cultural experiences, And we just now have more language and support for youth to describe and acknowledge their experiences. And I think as there's more support and awareness, we can just talk about it more, and youth are able to be like, oh, I can put knowledge and language to what is happening within my brain, body, everything, not even just related to gender identity, but just being in the world in general and mental health. So they can better have words for this and exploration instead of just shoving it down and not saying anything about it for different types of fears or feeling weird or something like that. So youth have a lot more ability to advocate for themselves and to find the words to talk about their experience. Next myth, all trans people fully transition. No, the fact is, transitioning is a personal experience for all gender diverse humans. Each experience is unique and can have various levels of transitioning incorporated. Fully transitioning, I put hard quotes, air quotes on that, is not an accurate representation of any one trans person or an appropriate term to use at all, anyway. There are many options to socially, legally, medically, surgically, and personally transition. And that is a very personal journey for trans folks. Next myth. Gender or transgender children medically and surgically transition. No, no. The fact is, trans children may explore their gender socially prior to puberty only. That is it. More on that later. There are no medical interventions available for children. Zero. Zero. An adolescent may utilize puberty delaying hormones if appropriate with the support and consent of their caregivers, mental health provider, medical team, a lot of people involved, and of course, the assent of the adolescent themselves. That's it. And that decision is between the trans youth, the caregivers, and their medical team. And it is healthy to stay within those people who have the knowledge, experience, and professionalism, and evidence-based medical care. Surgical options are not available for minors. Again, more on that later in the presentation. So throughout all of this, right, there are the stages of intrafamilial acceptance are absolutely not linear. Most things are not linear, so this is definitely a process over time, and that's really, really, really helpful for clinicians to remember and different providers to remember. Because sometimes we as providers can get, validly, of course, confused or frustrated if we have a caregiver that gets to this beautiful place of acceptance and understanding further, but then shifts back into moments of fear or denial or guilt or whatever emotion might come up. And it's just really important for us to remember as providers to hold this space for caregivers and family members with empathy and walk this process with them to create this area and environment where they can move between the different stages in a safe place so that it's just more authentic for them. Having this ideal, right, in a perfect world, right, we just are able to move through all these different stages, but that's just not reality. So creating this space to be able to move more fluidly through these different stages, if you will, allows them to be able to understand even more deeply. And that's just really important, right? Because that's how things can be more genuine. So the hope is that we'll ultimately get them back to a smoother trajectory of affirmation for their kiddo over time, because again, what we're going for is what's in the best interest of our child client. It's also important to remind caregivers and family members that their child's transition might also not be linear. So developmentally, kids typically just don't think linear all the time. And adults think more linearly. So sometimes it's harder for caregivers to reframe that mindset and to remember that fact. So it's important to take a step back and to listen to kiddos as they're exploring and know that that might just be something like this too. But if they have the safe space to be able to explore, that will be a lot more genuine and clear for them. Over time, throughout this process, our caregivers and family members are constantly learning and acquiring new knowledge at like a pretty rapid rate. Like there's a lot of information to take in here. And that could really be a lot for a caregiver to learn within identity exploration, especially if they don't have that same lived experience. It's very different. So sometimes I'll have parents ask me like, why is this so complicated? What do these feelings even mean? And I'll respond with something along the lines of, that's a great question. And I'm assuming you're asking because you just don't have this experience. So you wouldn't really know. It's a different lived experience, and that's okay. So being able to validate that there is confusion and just not understanding and being able to name that for parents that are caregivers and family members just is important to name that. It's probably coming from a place, potentially, obviously knowing the caregivers and who they are, right? Not making any assumptions. That just isn't their lived experience. And sometimes that can really help caregivers to be like, oh, yes, that makes sense. Navigating emotional responses and processing identity just continues to shift over time. It's important to reframe and refocus on the child's journey and experiences. So sometimes it can be really easy for parents to get lost in their own emotions, of course, validly so, with whatever they may be, and just get off track within their journey of working towards supporting their child, which for the child can accidentally, again, come off as lack of support. I've seen this time and time again. A parent struggling, a parent in a different stage, or whatever type of terminology you're using with the family, and this caregiver might be struggling, but very much support their kiddo, but might not be showing it in the most appropriate way, which again can actually come off as lack of support for the child. So it's really important to hold all of those things, make space for everything, to acknowledge them, and to help caregivers get back on track. It's important to acknowledge that from a deep place of empathy and not judgment, and walk them back to focusing on the child's journey and experiences. And ultimately, it's really important to remember that kids do not decide that they are trans. What they do decide is to tell us and when to tell us. And that is a privilege and an honor to be a part of their journey. The next part of the series, we're going to focus on working effectively with caregivers and family members, and learning about some different types of tools and strategies that could be helpful.